If someone was to ask me what is the one thing that we do not do as batsmen when preparing for a match, when preparing for the season, one thing that we don't do that could have a huge impact on everything we do, on our outcomes, on our general mental health and well-being, visualization would be it for me. Now, there have been times when my confidence with the bat has hit rock bottom, and this is the one exercise that has pulled me out. So, for those of you wondering, for those of you maybe even potentially intimidated by it, what is visualization? Visualization in sport, also known as mental imagery or mental rehearsal, is a powerful technique used by athletes to create a detailed mental image of themselves successfully executing their desired performance. It involves engaging all senses to make the experience as vivid and real as possible. So, runners have done it for years, visualizing races panning out in the way they want to. Psychologists have long understood that you can cultivate confidence simply by behaving as if you already have it. Shadow batting between deliveries or striding to the crease with purpose can positively impact your performance. Another way of faking confidence is to visualize the way you want to play in your mind's eye before the game begins. There's a great piece written by the well-respected Tim Wigmore on the topic. Here's an excerpt recalling one of the best innings in Test history. When stumps were called, Lara had a chat with Rudy Webster, West Indies mental skills coach. In his book, Think Like a Champion, Webster recalls, "My advice to him was to imagine the game as already won and to visualize and feel himself constructing that victory. I asked him to mentally rehearse seeing the ball the moment it leaves the bowler's hand and to feel his movements as he gets into position, smoothly and quickly to stroke the ball into the gaps in the field. I also asked him to see and feel himself playing his natural game, facing one ball at a time and enjoying the challenge." The following day, Lara played one of the greatest innings of all time. In the euphoria after his 153 not out, Lara told Webster, "I was seeing the ball so clearly I couldn't miss it. Everything worked out the way I imagined it." Another story about visualization is from Kiwi great Martin Crowe. He says, "Once in 1994, I was in bed for 3 weeks with the flu and all I did was visualize. When I went out to bat after that, I was in the zone. So as I understand it, that period of visualization came before his memorable 142 in a test match at Lords, where he hobbled between the wickets on one leg. The dodgy knee that would prematurely end his career, given him plenty of chip at that stage in his career, not enough to prevent him from going on to play what would probably be his proudest innings." That brings me to how I began experimenting with mental imagery. So, as I alluded to at the start, numerous times throughout my career, I have struggled to believe that I could do it again, that I could score runs, I could make big scores, going through confidence dips where I even stopped believing I could hit boundaries because my ball striking, for whatever reason, something had happened with my technique, my weight transfer, and I just stopped believing that I could hit boundaries various times in innings or various times in a stretch of innings throughout different stages of my career. And that's when something's missing. Now, bearing in mind, a number of those times were when I was a teenager. However, I did experience those throughout my 20s as well, where you go through a run of low scores and belief dips, and you just start to question your ability to do it again. And you can almost put the outcome or make the outcome seem much harder than it is in reality, when if you do end up breaking it down, it's just one contest after another and doing that ball after ball after ball, as they say, is the challenge. And that's the one thing that the best players have an innate ability to be able to do for long periods of time, and why they, for example, the Fab Four, why those guys seem to churn out runs. So this particular time I'm referring to, I was 19 and I was preparing for the National Under-19 tournament. And at that time, I hadn't scored a 50 for about 18 months. Now, to set the scene further, This was the fourth time I was attending the National Under-19 tournament, and I hadn't really nailed it yet. The first tournament I played, I'd averaged probably 15 to 20. That was as a 16-year-old, I believe. The following year I went back. I batted six again. Was quite low in the order. But once again, I was young, so we had a lot of strength up top. And so batting six was a good place to be at that particular point in time for the team. And I didn't make any big scores, but I got a few 40s and 50s not out. And I finished the tournament averaging 40, I think. The following year, as an 18-year-old, I went back, and this was before I was really starting to clutch at straws. However, I was on my way down in terms of the confidence dip. I was well and truly on my way down, and I couldn't score a run. I think I averaged 15 that tournament, and we're talking about some of the flattest tracks in the country at that particular point in time. And so I'd gone through a period of the following winter. As a still 18-year-old, I was at university for the first time down in Otago, and we'd had 3 one-week camps at Lincoln, the National Centre of Excellence there at Lincoln, and we'd done 3 one-week camps where we'd focused on basically trying to build up our innings, incorporate a huge amount of volume in there, work on a little bit of technique, and ultimately the idea is that you come out a better player. Now, I've written about this particular scenario where I spoke with Mike Shrimpton, who sat me down and chatted to me for, I think it was just over an hour, where he just broke down my personality completely and tried to identify strengths and weaknesses of that personality, and tried to set me on a more positive path towards run scoring, which I hadn't been in at this particular point in time in the story I'm referring to. My final National Under-19 tournament, hadn't scored a 50 for a year and a half, and my main goal as a junior cricketer, as an underage cricketer, was to play for the New Zealand Under-19 team and ideally to captain it. And this was the tournament that they were going to be selecting that team from. So I felt like all of the work I'd been doing, all of the mental energy I'd expended up until that age was going to go into this particular tournament. So, as I said, I had a chat to Shrimpo. That was in the September, I believe. And the tournament was going to be in and around December, January time. So I remember finishing university for the year in and around November, and I was packing offal at the meatworks in between the end of university year and the start of the tournament. So another sort of side story here, Mitchell McClenahan's father, Dennis, God rest his soul, he was our boss, and he got a few of us a job in at Hallaby Meats there in Otahu, where we'd start 6:30 in the morning, go through to anywhere between, say, 2:30 and 5:30, depending on the volumes of meat that they needed to produce for people to buy on the shelves at the supermarket at that particular point in time. There was a group of us cricketers, actually. Mark Craig was there at various times. Obviously, Mitchell McClenahan himself was there. We had Colin Munro in for a bit. I think Colin de Gronholm may or may not have spent some time there over the years. But we had a good crew there, all working in different parts of the meat processing plant. And this one particular time, I was working packing offal, and it was the perfect kind of mindless work to switch off to and harness the mind, so that I could focus on positive performances from the past to try and relive the feeling of those days. So as I look back on it, I don't know how I got through all of those mind-numbing hours of packing meat, but for this particular point in my life, this was exactly how I got through it. I just tried to think about all those days where it had gone well for me, and at that point in time, I felt like I didn't have too many that I was genuinely pleased with. There might have been 3 maximum that I could think back to and think that's a day I'm really proud of, and a day I'd like to repeat again. So I just tried to think back to, as Shrimpo told me, think back to the sights, the sounds, and the general experience that I had on that day. So before I batted, what was I thinking and feeling? Maybe even what I'd eaten that particular morning, walking out to bat, And then in the middle of my innings, what was it that I was thinking and feeling at that particular point in time? So I just tried to remember back, and then any particular shots that I remember playing, the feeling of passing 50, the feeling of passing 100, and then the feeling of walking off. Um, and my proudest innings are always when I'm walking off undefeated, walking off with the umpires, and you're getting that round of applause. And yeah, it's only a brief moment, and naturally I feel a little bit embarrassed at that particular point in time to be, the one you sort of singled out for the applause. But it seems to pass in a moment. But I guess it's those feelings that you long for, or certainly me anyway. I guess everyone might be slightly different. So as it panned out, those hours I spent letting my mind wander off to far more enjoyable experiences than the scene of blood all over my hands and overalls. As that sort of paid off, um, I ended up scoring 400 runs and an average of 100 at the national tournament, and was selected to captain my country at the 2006 Under-19 World Cup. So, that was a scenario where it all panned out well. I think looking back retrospectively, what I did was I put a lot of time and effort into preparing for the national tournament. If only I'd put that amount of time and energy into preparing for the World Cup, it might have been more of a success. Now I've written a blog about my failings of that particular tournament, which I can link to if anybody would like to see that. It was at the time New Zealand's worst performance in a national under-19, in a World Cup, under-19 World Cup, and I was the captain, and I failed as a player and as a leader, and it took me a long time to sort of get over the disappointment and the frustration at myself that I couldn't get the job done when it really mattered. And ultimately, players came out of that World Cup, the likes of Todd Astle, Hamish Bennett, Martin Guptill, Andrew DeBorder. Those guys came out of that World Cup with enhanced reputations and went on to have, long and in most cases long and sort of positive careers. That wasn't to be for me, so I do look back on that tournament as though it was a missed opportunity. But if we come back to the topic, confidence is something that's brought out the best and worst in me. So when I've believed in myself over the years, I'd go on streaks of 5 to 8 innings, averaging 100, and then it would eventually crash back down to earth. So at other stages, I'd go through an entire season without registering a half century, as I've already alluded to. There are times when I thought I'd lost the ability to make big scores. So a couple of years later, I was at the University of Otago. I was put in touch with a sports psychologist. We met to talk through the fluctuations I was experiencing with my confidence. I shared that when my confidence was high, I was one of the top players, but when my confidence plummeted, I was woeful. She suggested I tried writing a journal of innings I wanted to play in the future. So the idea with this was that I was naturally a writer, and this would be a good way for me to start utilising the creative juices that I have in my mind and bring them to life on the page. The key part of our conversation that really stuck with me and allowed me to understand the potential benefits of investing the time in visualising was this. Emotions, more importantly your confidence, is associated with the subconscious part of the brain. The subconscious part of the brain responds to the images that it sees. The subconscious cannot differentiate between real or imagined. All images are taken as legitimate. So therefore, get creative with your imagery, and you can positively impact the emotions generated from those images, and your confidence will improve as a result. So I started off energetically with my journal writing. However, not long into each of my 3 imagined innings, I got writer's cramp, I lost rhythm, and also the enjoyment for it. Ultimately, it took too long to write, and I gave up. So my performances continued to ebb and flow. At my best, I was as good as anyone in the country my age, but at my worst, I might as well have been a beginner. Fast forward to a couple of years later, I started asking members of my cricket community if they knew a sports psychologist. I was put in touch with former Black Cap Richard Petrie. He suggested visualising peak performance against my upcoming opposition, and even picturing myself wearing the black cap would be the best way to go. So I tried this out, but my mind was so negative at that particular point in time that I'd often picture myself nicking the ball and being caught behind. After a while, it felt pointless and I gave up. In that season, I averaged 20. Now, bearing in mind what I was trying to do at that particular point in time was, what he suggested was, at bedtime, just spending 5 minutes before you sort of nod off to sleep, just imagining the best case scenario for you. Good shots, imagining scoring 50, scoring 100, etc. Just all positive feelings. So once again, I was doing this in bed um, after the lights had been turned out, and you're just kind of drifting off to sleep. But as I said, I couldn't control my mind because my mind was just wandering off into these negative memories that I'd had in the past, and I ultimately, my confidence was at a low ebb to the point where that's all I could see happening. So a year later, I was still averaging 20. I'd have the odd innings here or there, but week to week, I was just, I'd literally turn up at the ground and I'd just be hoping that I would, make a good score. So something had to change. After all, wasn't it Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? So I reached out to Peaches again and I told him why I gave up on his initial suggestion. Best thing was he thought about it for a little bit, and he then recommended I gain control of the images in my mind by commentating an innings of myself. So picturing myself from like a bird's eye view, like from behind and above my head. So at that time, the commute to training took 30 minutes to get there and obviously 30 minutes to get home. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I spent every minute of that commute commentating innings, performing well and scoring hundreds against my upcoming opponents. Can you imagine it? Literally me driving in my car. And at that time, I was living in Wellington, actually, as you probably imagine by the fact that I was dealing with Richard Petrie. Driving my car, and it was warm in the afternoons at times. So I'd have the windows down. And, if the car was moving, I'd be fine because I'd realise that no one would really be able to hear me commentating. But as we got to intersections, and there were people standing on the side of the road waiting to cross the road, I would put the window up and I would just try and put it out of my mind, the self-conscious feeling of these people can see, I'm like talking to myself. I just hope they thought I was either like on the phone or something, or maybe even singing along to the radio. That was the only way I could sort of get my head around it. But yeah, it was pretty embarrassing to begin with. But I just thought, look, I'm just going to throw myself into this. And the reason why I felt that was because at that time I'd already had my first child, and I was ultimately minimizing my income by choosing to devote my life, as I saw it at that particular point in time, to cricket. I was prioritizing cricket. I wasn't prioritizing earning money, and having a partner at that time with our first child, it was impacting our life. The fact that uh, we weren't able to have holidays. Even just we were living week to week. We didn't have much left over, and it was a bit of a struggle. So I was just sick and tired of being in the position that I was in, not earning money from playing cricket. And I wanted it to change drastically. And I just thought, look, I don't care how embarrassing this is. I don't care what it looks like. I'm just going to throw myself into this and just see what happens. So during the rest of the season, I scored 200s. I averaged 70, including scores of 87 and 40 in the PS Cup final, as we beat Eastern Suburbs and claimed our first title in 30 years. So that was a 3-day final at the Basin Reserve, and it was arguably one of my most enjoyable experiences to look back on as a team. To play across 3 days, to beat a team outright in a final where we didn't necessarily have to win outright, I believe. Easts actually had to win the game outright. We'd finished top qualifier and therefore had the benefit of, first innings win would be enough for us to claim the title, which meant that Easts played a riskier brand of cricket than they might have otherwise had they been front running. And it was incredible. I mean, I'd never played on the Basin before. The batting surface was superb. It was fast. It was bouncy. And with that, it meant that the surface, just meant that the bowler was always in it, because day 1 and 2, it was good pace, good bounce. And I got out for 87 in the first innings, trying to square drive a ball that just wasn't quite there to drive. And I was caught at gully, and I thought, geez, that's a sign of a really good wicket. You're in, you're batting well, you make a slight judgment error, get a little bit overconfident, slight judgment error, takes the outside edge and it flies to gully, and was a good catch taken at gully there by, I believe, my old mate Ben Orton, playing for Easts. And as it turned out, the wicket started taking a bit more turn in the second innings, and another one of my good mates, Jared Sewell, took 10 for the match for us, I believe. I think it was 5 in the first, 5 in the second. And an incredible victory, and purely just on the back of all of that time I'd spent visualising everything happen. So in the January, so this match was in the March, at the very end of March, I believe. In the January, I'd scored 100 against Easts on the back of me just starting to do this visualisation. And it was the first game back after Christmas, and everything. I was just hitting everything out of the middle, and my confidence was high, and I got 100 on the dot, and I got out, I think, next ball after my 100, being overly aggressive, got a bit cocky, and got cleaned up, got bowled one back on me. And so I took that as a real boost, that the work we've been putting in was paying off. And so I just kept at it and kept at it. Now, bearing in mind, it hasn't always worked that way. It hasn't always worked out where I've started visualizing and I've seen results straight away. Sometimes it can take some time, so I will encourage you to be patient with it. A few years later, again, I was a little light on runs, playing for Auckland University. We were chasing more than 300 on the second day of a match against Cornwall at Cornwall Park, and it was a week between the first and the second day. And in between, I had a 6-hour round road trip in the car to complete. So instead of listening to music the whole time, I thought I'd switch off and visualise performing well on the weekend ahead. I imagined all of the opposition bowlers running in, bowling to me, and how I was going to respond. So like before, in order to control my imagination, I commentated the innings and finished unbeaten on more than 100. So that weekend, I went on to make 88. We fell just short of the target by 40 runs. I remember being incredibly disappointed, because at that particular point in time, I thought, I've done the preparation and the result was just going to take care of itself. I was that confident that if I did this, if I took the time, the result was guaranteed. So, as I said, I made 88. I batted for a long period of time. Actually, this innings was more of a grind. The wicket wasn't anywhere near as good as that one at the Basin. It was a little bit slower, a little bit lower. And so it was, I think I faced 170 balls. So I think I got out in the third session. And frustratingly, when I got out, everyone else fell around me. And we'd been in a good position and fallen short. So I just remember being actually quite angry at the end of that game. I put in some serious grind, and we hadn't got the perfect outcome, which was, for me, would have been 100 unbeaten and walking off, having gained the first innings points. So while it's not a perfect formula, I will say it's pretty darn close. So fast forwarding again a few years, I moved back to Belfast, Northern Ireland in 2017, and the following 3 years I was involved with the Northern Knights. In the interest of leaving no stone unturned, I once again looked to visualisation to try and gain an edge. While my performance across those 3 years was strong, I didn't gain any real benefit from visualisation, and I couldn't quite work out why. So carving out a hospitable environment for visualisation is key, and I probably hadn't quite understood that at that particular point. So if you're looking to shadow bat as you visualise, you're going to need a decent amount of space both above you and around you to swing the bat properly. I didn't have that until we moved house in the winter of 2021 it was. So it was springtime 2021. So all my efforts to that point in my time in Northern Ireland had been restricted by, bookcases and light lampshades and lights coming out of the ceiling, that kind of thing. So I wasn't able to get into the flow. Now, bearing in mind, a lot of my visualization up until that particular point in time hadn't been physical. It had just been purely mental, just me imagining it, me commentating while driving in a car, that kind of thing. At this particular point in time, I decided to try and blend together the idea of understanding what the bowlers were trying to do, maybe write a few notes about that so they were clear in my mind, and then physically shadow batting as well as commentating, so that I had full control over everything that was happening with the visualization process. So in 2022, my club, Civil Service North, we made the Challenge Cup final, and I visualised with as much energy and vibrance as ever before, hoping to repeat my feat of a cup final 100 4 years previous, only hoping to change the result. We lost that match in 2018. So I embarked on a structured 6-week training program that included visualization 4 to 5 times a week. The extra space I had in the house and in the room I used made the process so much easier and far more enjoyable. So in the final, in bowler-friendly conditions, I struck a sweetly timed runnable 30, but I made a technical error to get out and got out very softly. I tried to pull the overseas pro and got it high on the bat, got caught at mid-on, just the ball looped up to mid-on, and we lost by 10 wickets. So once again, it's not a perfect formula, but it's pretty bloody close. So on this particular occasion, I felt hard done by. Once again, I felt angry. I thought it was a sure thing. I thought I'd controlled everything I could in the process. I'd stopped eating sugar. I was hitting balls, I think, 2 or 3 days a week, which for me, working full time is a challenge to do, but I was devoting a lot of extra time outside of, work and family life to make sure that happened. I'd done all the work in the lead up, and I thought surely the result will take care of itself. It wasn't to be. So there are many variables at play at any given time, and while the pull shot was a strength in my arsenal in previous seasons, I wasn't training at a high enough intensity to give myself the best chance of executing the shot against their pro, and ultimately he was too good for me on the day. Once again, another lesson learned. So the 2024 season was one where I visualised consistency across a 5-month campaign and experienced one of my best seasons in my career. I scored just under 700 runs in 17 innings at an average of 53. So never have I felt such a level of consistent confidence throughout the entire duration of the season. So while some of that has to be attributed to the fact that I'm at a stage in my career where I know my game inside out and the number of innings I've had across my career, it helps you to believe that you can do it against a certain bowler, against a certain bowling attack on a certain ground. The thing is, you just can't beat that positive mental imagery when it comes to building and maintaining confidence. So last year in 2024, my process did evolve. So it included video analysis for the first time, and I've written about that, which you can find on my blog and on the website. The key difference for me between batting when I haven't visualised and when I have is that I find my rhythm a lot quicker. So obviously one of the key variables in club cricket is the pitches we play on. You can be on a green seamer one week, a low slow one the next, followed by a rank turner after that. Often these conditions can take 10 plus overs to get accustomed to, for me anyway, maybe not for everyone, but certainly for me. However, when I've been visualising, this just isn't the case. So it's as if I'm simply resuming an innings from where I last finished visualising. I get off the mark quickly and usually score a boundary in my first 6 to 10 balls. So to summarise, it's taken me the guts of 20 years to find a formula that works. I've taken the time to write about it on my blog, to talk to you about it here today, so that you don't have to search for a process yourself, so that you can give this a try and just see where it takes you, and hopefully it helps you along the road to consistent success. So I'd love for you to give it a try. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen? And I'd love for you to tell me how you get on.